Well, welcome to the program, Marc. It's great to have you on board. I'm looking forward to hearing from another global citizen.
Simon, thanks for having me. It's exciting.
So I always start by asking, Marc, what brought you to Treasury and why did you choose Treasury as your career?
It's quite easy, actually. I started with a few sales jobs and business development. I went to a business school that has an engineering background. So I always felt like I had to go into that engineering role. But I ended up in public accounting. I spent a few years at PwC. And at PwC, you could kind of, the Belgium office is large enough that, you have a lot of opportunities, but it's not too big that you get, drafted immediately into a particular job. And I ended up doing multiple different things. And the interesting part were like the treasury centers and the banks and the financial centers. So I ended up doing a lot of these. Some of it was consulting, and then that ended up dying off because of regulation, and we couldn't do that much of that. But it was at the time of Sarbanes-Oxley, when those laws were coming into play, and people had to start thinking about, processes and controls, and so every treasurer, whether they were regional or global treasurer, had to rethink their process, and we came and helped and designed those and looked at their process. And it was a fantastic way for me to actually see what a treasury department is. And I like the fact that there was a technical aspect. I clearly didn't want to become a bean counter. No disrespect for that. Certain people love it, and you need to have the right profile for that. I did not have the right profile for that. I enjoy the capital market aspect. I enjoy all of the technicality around the financial products that came along with Treasury. I love the complexity of the accounting with that and all of it. And then you have like the operations side of things. So that excited me. And about 15 years ago, one of my clients, Johnson Controls, asked me to join. And that's how I joined the team in Brussels, Belgium.
So just for the listeners, 3 years with PwC in audit. And by the way, I'm an ex-auditor from KPMG, so I understand what you mean by not fitting the mold particularly well. Great grounding though, I really enjoyed it. And then you moved to Johnson Controls, where you've been for the last 15 years. And the most important thing within that is you haven't been sat still for 15 years. You've worked in Europe, you've worked in the Middle East, you've worked in Asia Pacific, and now you're in Milwaukee at headquarters, in the head office, obviously, in the US business. So maybe just start, Marc, what would you say have been the highlights and the things that really jumped to mind so far in your career that are the standouts?
My willingness to accept any sort of challenge. The only advice I give to young people that are looking for some like key advice on, how I can be successful or how I can, travel the world like maybe I might have. Just say yes when people ask you, do you want to try something that you've never done? Don't be scared, whether it's a new location, a business you don't know, or something you've not done before. If somebody is asking you if you want to do it, they're already interested in how your mind works. And that's all that matters. You got to keep that mind working, get to a new challenge and try something new. And I joined JCI in Brussels, and we were going through a very large merger at the time in Europe, and I was brought on to help kind of organize some of that. And then the corporate treasurer at the time asked me to replace somebody in Milwaukee. At that time, I was told for just a year or two, and that ended up being 5. And I transitioned there. And then when that was over, I was offered a job in China. And just say yes when people ask you to do something a little different. Just what do you really have to lose? And people are so scared about doing something outside of their comfort zone, even very early on, but also culturally to do something else on the other side of the world. And we were kind of talking about that before. It's like how you need to open up your view of the world and just see that everything is about the same. It's just small cultural differences that actually will make your life and job much more exciting and interesting, because you might be doing exactly, when I was in Asia, I did the exact same thing I did in Europe. But the cultural aspect and the controls over the currency and the legal framework was different. And it made it extremely exciting, even though I was doing something I did maybe 10 years before. So you gotta open up your mind and accept to move around. And so I went through that. And then when we went through a very large transformation of the company, where we became almost a $50 billion company. We spun off our automotive business and sold our battery business, which gave exciting opportunity that we can talk about from a treasury standpoint. I became the assistant treasurer, and then a little over a year ago, the treasurer of the company retired, and I took over as the corporate treasurer at that point.
Marc, I just want to touch on that global citizen element. So you mentioned, a 10-year period there where you were in Europe and you were also in Hong Kong and Asia. What were the subtle differences, the things that people may not have thought about between working in those two environments?
Yeah, the most important part is like what's common. It's like people get very scared when I talk to younger people and say, "Are you interested to go and work in our China office or in our Japan office or French or UK based office when they're in Milwaukee, and have them travel the world?" There's a lot of concerns around, well, I don't know how they work. I don't know how the way most culture work. And I was lucky enough to literally cover the entire world. I cover Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I literally went in all of those locations and worked on the ground those locations in Asia Pacific and in the whole of the Americas. Johnson Controls is a very global company. I had the chance to see how everybody works, and there's tons of commonality. Now, obviously, there's cultural differences, and if you are open-minded enough, you will notice them very quickly, and you will try and work around those. Some are easier than others to accept. Working in the Middle East comes with some challenges, around the culture there and the acceptance or not of female workers in the workforce. That's very difficult to deal with, but that's the extreme you're going to see. You go in Asia, for example, and I spent a lot of time in China. The way you need to try and when you go through a negotiation, for example, you need to try and find a way to leave the door open for the person you're negotiating with, for them to kind of save face and not, push your win to the other person. You know what I'm trying to say? You need Absolutely. that culture of saving face is so important. And I wasn't aware of that. I had heard about it. I didn't know how that translated day to day, and I was often in negotiation with joint venture partner, and we clearly had opposite view into what we wanted out of this. And I wanted my cash out of the entity. They wanted to reinvest into projects that maybe were not approved just yet. And so finding a way to, you're never going to find a common ground. Somebody's going to win, but getting that win while allowing those people to find a way to save face personally and to their own management is extremely important, more important than anywhere in the world. And that's almost more important than reaching the goal at some stage. That was an important aspect, and how the relationship building in China is all around that networking aspect, the Guangxi aspect of who do you know, who I can help you connect with. It's almost important than what sort of conversation you're going to have with that person directly. It's like, what do you mean from a connection, from a network standpoint? What are you going to bring to the table? Yes, we're trying to do this new company and open this new plan in wherever China, but then after that, what are you going to bring to the table, to the relationship? Very interesting. That's differences that you discover. But most cultures are, and most international business people you're going to meet are open enough to realize that you might not understand some of that. And if you're lucky enough, like I was, to have patient people on the other side to let me understand there and get to that level, your life is not that complicated. And at the end of the day, everybody needs to do their job. Everybody has their objective. Everybody has, stakeholder they need to serve. And you just got to be understanding of that. And, don't ignore the cultural difference, but don't let them stop you from taking on a challenge and talking to people.
And Marc, how different was it moving from the regional roles within Europe and Asia, and then going to head office in the United States?
Yeah, there's a sense when you are, and it's very different, by the way, when I was in the head office in Asia Pacific from when I was in Europe. There is something about Asia that you're so distanced, both from a pure mileage standpoint, physical distance, but also a time zone standpoint. You gain an extra layer of freedom that maybe when we were in Europe, we did not have, because you're close enough, a flight between, the East Coast to, London is 6 or 7 hours, and there's only maybe 6 or 7 hours of time difference. So most of the day you can communicate with, with the team in Europe. Being in Asia, and at the time we had a very large presence in Asia, Johnson Control sales in Asia were north of $10 billion. So very large presence in Asia, and I felt a mini treasurer of that region. And I had a lot of freedom, and I had a great boss as well that gave me that freedom, and a CFO that was open to have the Treasury department go a little bit outside of the usual box, because of the situation of Asia being so far away and needing people on the ground that had that entrepreneurship vision kind of view, and willing to take a little bit more risk, because the communication is just not that easy. I still spent most of my nights on the phone back with Milwaukee trying and get approval for things and explaining what we were trying to do. But you still had that isolation and that freedom you had. In Europe, it was a little bit different. It's more like a traditional remote kind of office where you can easily refer back to the head office and say, can we do this? Can we do that? We want to switch bank in that country. That comes more easily because simply time difference and distance. But that's really how JCI was organized. We're centralizing a little bit more now. And so trying to harmonize processes a little more, so things are not that different from region to region. But I would say that's the biggest difference I saw.
And was there a big difference? Like, obviously, in a regional-based role, you're a lot more cash flow, liquidity focused, whereas in head office, I'm guessing you're a lot more. There's a lot more strategy. There's a lot more capital. That bigger picture viewpoint as well would be different.
Absolutely. Again, I'm going to come back to Asia because it was so different. We had about half of our sales in China, so $5 billion were in China, and we were in a period of heavy investment. And because of the restriction and capital control that existed and continue to evolve and still exist to this day in China, you need to think about an operation of $5 billion of sales within a, at that time, $40 billion organization. That's a self-contained unit. It's very hard to get the cash out, or very expensive to get the cash out. And when you get cash in, when you inject either equity or loans to kind of fund projects, you always need to be thinking about the exit almost like it's an independent cluster of money and funding from the rest of the organization. And so that kind of gave me a chance to think more strategically about the capital structure of my entity in China, the way I today think about it as the global company that it is. So it gave me kind of a preview with the ability to fail, because I was my own internal stakeholders. And, if we didn't inject sufficient capital, we had ways to fix that by providing liquidity from the outside, from offshore China. But it was very different. The head office generally focus on policy, capital markets. If you centralize, trading and derivative use, that sort of things. The regional office much more focused on supporting the business and the operation, and making sure that JCI has a big book of trade finance, huge activity, whether it's guarantees, factoring, supply chain program, all of that, putting that in place and supporting it for the operations was kind of very, very exciting part of my growth. And what a lot of people do when they need to grow in Treasury is often they have to go outside of the company they work in, just because they outgrow that role, and the timing doesn't always work. I was very lucky in terms of timing of transition, but I was also very lucky to be working for a company that was expanding extremely rapidly through M&A and organic growth, and changing and developing, giving me and the team the opportunity to do things we would not have been able to do unless we were working either for a consulting type of environment or working for different companies. We would have jumped off, or I would have jumped off from firm to firm.
I totally agree with you there, Marc. Timing is everything in Treasury. It's one of those areas that's so niche and specialist that, the role that you want, generally someone has to leave for you to get that. It's not like unless you're in a really rapidly growing, expanding business like you were. But yeah, that's where my business works really well, in that everyone tends to move externally to make those moves. So really great to be during a growth phase and be able to move internationally like you have. Is there one thing that surprised you in making those moves as a global citizen that you think listeners should know about?
Well, from a personal side, it's tough, right? You gotta take into account moving your family. It's tougher than your own job, because you have work, and generally when you stay within the same company, it's the same culture. Some of the people are the same, and you have that job every day. But the outside world doesn't really matter, because you're very focused on your job, particularly the first few weeks or months you move in. Your family, it's much tougher because everything changed for them. The stores, the schools, that environment is completely different, and they don't have that anchor that you have as the working professional to be able to just recognize your colleagues and have the same processes. And that anchor helps you getting more comfortable to that transition. The toughest part is making sure that you spend sufficient time for your family to adjust. And I was doing those moves with other expats, and expats meet expat, and you get close to those expatriate communities, and you could see it wasn't working, where the family had the toughest time. I rarely saw the working individual that was the reason for the global move or the transition to a different country. Very rarely that person was so had so many issues around integrating with the new work culture that they decided to move. It has happened, but that's very rarely the reason why those expatriate assignments would fail. Most of the time, it's around really your family and how you are able to make new friends and create an environment for your wife, your partner, your children, whomever that might be, to be able to ease in that new culture, because their cultural shock is going to be much tougher than yours, because you have that commonality of the company you work for.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, having a happy family makes all the difference in terms of making the transition smooth, doesn't it?
Happy wife, the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
yep.
From a career perspective then, Marc, is there what's the one thing that you wish you'd known when you were 25 that you know now that you'd like to pass on to the listeners?
One of the big flaw I had when I was younger is when I had the answer to a problem, when I understood what needed to happen, either because I'd done it before, because I had, thought about it long enough, I had a tendency to just not listen anymore and push through, which was extremely helpful at the beginning of my career. It helped me being able to deliver things very quickly and kind of rise within the different organizations I worked with, which was, PwC or before, or even at Johnson Controls. Being able to deliver quick and efficiently what was great. Problem that comes with that is, even though you might have the answer, you alone having the answer is just not enough for success, or at least sustainable success. And just being able to, even though you think you know what might be the right answer, and even though it may be the right answer for the long term, communicating properly, getting the support from others, getting the buy-in from others, selling pretty much the answer is as important as having the answer. You see what I mean? And I wish I would have been better earlier in my career, because there's some people I had through that process, and I realized that, and I don't think that needed to happen. But it's really hard. That's a thing that's really, nobody tells you that. And even if they tell you that, you don't really comprehend it until the projects become bigger and your responsibility become bigger, and the stakeholder become very diverse, either from they have different operational obligations, or they have different cultural background. That becomes really, really when you realize maybe I need to do a better job selling either the idea or the project or whatever it might be.
Marc, is there anything specifically you look for when you're recruiting your direct hires into your team? Softer skills, technical skills. What are the key things at your end?
It depends on the level, right? If you're looking at the very lowest level of the organization, junior analyst, the analyst kind of framework. If you've had corporate treasury experience, great, but it's really not a must. What I'm looking for at that stage is a brain, and a brain that's moldable, somebody that's open to do different things, people that are smart and curious, and people that are, willing to, learn. And if I have somebody that's done the perfect prior history of work the last 3 years, but may not demonstrate that flexibility, somebody that doesn't have that experience that will come in on board within a year or two will overtake that person that had the proper experience, because it's that mentality that's the most important. And that's the toughest part to detect in an individual that you're interviewing. Once they work with you and you've actually been able to test them and put them on project and see how they react with others and see if they really, truly, genuinely have that intellectual curiosity that is required to develop themselves, that's only then that you discover. Being able to get there through just an interview and normal hiring process is really hard.
And what about for your direct reports? When they're more senior, what do you look for there?
Yeah, when they're more senior, it's very different. So I have a particular communication style. As you can tell, I have a lot of energy, and I like, I like what I do. So what's very important for me when you go to a more senior level, senior manager, director, maybe VP level people within the organization, you need to find people that like what they do. Unfortunately, in Treasury, there's a group of people that have fallen into Treasury. They were smart enough and good enough to do the job, but I don't think it's something they really wanted to do. And the problem you have when you do that and you get senior enough in your career, you become a little bit blasé. You become blasé because you don't want to see change, or you already kind of know the answer, and you don't have that passion and curiosity to keep on going. So I'm looking for the people with the right experience, but also I want to see that experience that brought them where they are, not because it happened to them, but because they had the desire either to go through that, or they were open-minded enough, as we talked about earlier, to actually take a chance and do something different And whether you spend 10 years in accounting or in FP&A or in operation, and somebody told you Treasury, you should try it, and it becomes something really interesting and grew from there, it's great. If you got there because there was nothing else and you stuck there, it's tougher. It's tougher because you're not going to be a great leader. A leader's got to inspire, and it's tough to inspire people if you don't have that bug in you, of whatever work it is, whether it's Treasury or any sort of operation. If you have that in you, that inspiration is going to feel stale, and people are not going to be receptive, and you're not going to be an effective leader long term.
Marc, having moved around so much, what's been your approach to networking and the advice you would have around networking as a global citizen?
Well, networking when you're in with your own area, it's been, it's easy when you stay in your own country. When you move to a completely different world, what I did is I attended conferences and things of that nature to kind of start meeting, other regional treasurer or other treasurers within that area. Banks are very good, by the way, at making that happen. So I would put the bug in the ear of my relationship managers, telling them, I'd like to understand this. Could you put me in contact with somebody that has set up a cash pool in US dollar onshore China? And I would create those connections. What's very interesting over my career, there's a lot of people that I've worked with, whether it was PwC, JCI, or even before, and I've kept in touch with the vast majority of them. And some of them have, become treasurer just like I have. Some of them have become CFO, and I keep a close connection to those people. And they naturally create an expansion to your network. there's recently heard of another company that did not have the answer to somebody asking him a question, but he knew I had done something similarly. It's like, hey, Marc introduced me to that gentleman. He needs a new treasury management system, and they have literally zero budget to get there. What did you guys do when you got through that level? Because we've done that with some of our spin-off and some of the company we separated. We had to literally create standalone treasury infrastructure from the people, process, and system standpoint. And so glad to help. And that network keeps on growing in that way, and it's a great way to connect. The other thing is that about 10 years ago, a friend of mine and I founded a software company. It's actually a software that helps people do treasury work, particularly in the exposure around foreign exchange. And through that, I've met customers of that company as they were brought on board. And that created a huge network that went through the treasury software kind of world. And very few treasury team in 2020 operate without a treasury management system, whether it's a big one or a large one. But digital transformation, when I was at PwC 17 years ago, we would see people that would run a treasury in Excel. That's been extremely rare. And so that industry of the treasury system user is a great way to network and connect as well. So former colleagues, the banks are really good in helping you making connection. And then the IT, the software vendor, very, very great way to network and have a particular in that particular process.
And what about mentors, Marc? Have mentors been a big part of your career development?
Not formal mentors, but I have people that have been extremely gracious with their time and have been willing to listen to me vent or complain or trying to figure out what were my next step or what were my problem or why things were not working. And over the years, I've been very lucky to have that. I've had great bosses as well, very good bosses and bosses, so CFOs and treasurer and regional treasurer I worked for over the year, extremely generous in their coaching and really willing to let me fail and help me, guide me through that process. So I've been extremely fortunate in the people I've met. There's always a side of luck in life, whether it's timing or people you meet. And there's a lot of that I have called coaches over the years. And as I grow, maybe that relationship doesn't work and it keeps on going on. And then I was part of an executive kind of training program within the company here. And I had kind of a formal coach for a couple of years. That worked well, but it's a bit unnatural and it didn't work for me. Let's just put it that way.
I think it needs to be natural, doesn't it? And that's where, be it your boss or your boss's boss, the fact they take you under their wing and it just is a natural thing, or someone you meet externally who takes you under their wing, that when it's natural like that, it's a much more, and you feel more comfortable. You're willing to, it's not a forced discussion. It's a natural discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Marc, what would you say makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, the board?
Wow. I think that depends from company to company, but trying to answer your question as generally as I can, you need to be very good. So treasury has a lot of technical aspect to it, right? Whether it's the financial instrument you use, the process to go through a capital market raise, the complexity around asset management or credit management, whatever the process is, treasury is very technical. And a successful treasurer manages to simplify all of that for everybody else. So the treasury team is supposed to take care of that, but they don't need to know how the sausage is made. And a lot of treasurer, and the problem is we spend a lot of time on it. It's really complicated. And it often explains why something ends up costing more or less. Why do you have a gain or loss? There's P&L and income statement implication to that, but you need to try and simplify it as much as you can with taking the essence of what the nature of the problems are to be able to communicate it with the internal stakeholder. Very important, whether it's the CFO, the CEO, or the rest of the management team. If you're a regional treasurer, you generally have regional CFO or regional operational people that you need to try and build a relationship very close. That's another very important aspect. I think a success treasurer is one that is very close to the operations, so we can take away the pain point from the operation. It's a process we've gone through at JCI very rigorously to try and optimize working capital. We had some issues a few years around working capital. Being able to get closer to the business and understand their needs, how they manage inventory, payables, receivable, what's the best structure you could put in place to extend payment term maybe with suppliers, what type of suppliers do they have. You can only get to that granular operational implementation if you're very close to the operational people. And I'm not saying like, just have a meeting or two with them to understand how it works. Really being clear to understand how their business are performing and where are the pain points. And 90% of those you can't help, but for the 10% you can help, you'll add tremendous value to the rest of the organization. And that's extremely important. And then one big challenge of Treasury Department, I think it's not just at JCI, it's across the world. We generally have small staff. I don't know why that's the case. It's always like that, but Treasury teams rely very heavily, we talked about it, on system. And we rely very heavily on system because we don't have a choice. You rarely see 100 people in a Treasury Department. There's other specialized function where you see large organization in tax, in financial planning, in different aspect of finance, you can see large organization. Somehow Treasury is always very, very contained. To be able to deliver high quality, you need very good process and systems. And so you need to be very good with systems, understand how they interoperate with the rest of the operation, and be able to go through that digital transformation so you can manage your Treasury Department with a very small headcount. And that's tough and kind of always been tough.
Marc, you mentioned systems. Obviously, technology is advancing very quickly, and the virus and everything that's happening right now probably extrapolating that even faster. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the coming years?
Huge, particularly cash visibility and cash forecasting becoming increasingly important every year. Since I've worked, it's all the next year big, how are you going to improve cash forecasting? And there's different tools and different methodology, and everybody, it's always the buzz. But the reality of it is that it has become more and more important, and more tools have come in. Cash visibility, we were the early adopter, of having all of our bank account reporting is a third-party platform and not a bank platform, whether it's for payments of bank account statements, intraday or next day statements, previous day statement. I'm sorry. We were the early adopter, and when you're able to do that efficiently, you can then bring a lot of value to the operation, and early on give them the warning sign of cash flow issues or capital expenditure that are going overboard, or particular projects that are not working well, because you have everything centralized into one single system. We've done the same with our trade finance or book or trade finance instrument. LC, bank guarantees, and all of that are always in the system. We used to have like 50 Excel spreadsheets running around that would take us, a month to combine together, to realize suddenly our portfolio of LC in the Middle East had exploded by $50 million. We have now everything centralized into a system. We can track that right away and immediately alert the business that, LCs are not free. Can you find a way to work with an open account? Can we do better credit management work with some of the counterparties to reduce that cost, to reduce that credit usage, and find a better way to operate? Digitalization, hugely important. The Treasury universe has tons of systems. A lot of them are excellent. So it's not like you don't have options. You just got to be willing to adopt it. And one of the tougher things is sell it internally, because unfortunately, in the mindset of a CFO, a small department is supposed to come with a small budget. And that's the point that treasuries have, is that we can stay small if we have enough IT infrastructure spend to be able to maintain that team. Otherwise, the quality goes down. And in treasury, it's fairly easy to measure operational efficiency. You know, idle cash you have. How many wires do you need to make to kind of fund the company? Where do you manage to pull assets and cash and maybe debt at some point in an efficient way? It's very easy to measure, and it's easy to make a business case for a better operational efficiency and get some more funding, but it requires some strategic vision on the part of the treasurer to be able to not only deliver that message within the treasury team, but within the CFO organization. And those systems only work well when they're connected to the ERPs, when they're connected to the reporting system. So the treasurer become like a strategic individual within the overall digital transformation of the company.
Marc, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. I love your energy and your enthusiasm, and I'm sure the listeners would have had an absolute ball. So thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you, Simon. Always a pleasure.